Hey everyone, we're currently entering the 9th year of Dead by Daylight, so I thought we could look back at some of the very worst perks that have existed through the years, looking at 4 terrible perks that existed in every year. Let's get into it. Year 1 is of course the launch year, and so the year with undoubtedly the highest quantity of bad perks to pick from. I could realistically make a video on just this year. It was a chaotic time back then with lots of unbalanced perks. Deja Vu should kick us off, I think, with it debatably being one of the most useless perks in DBD history. It had the pathetic effect of revealing 2 generator auras at the start of a match, for just 8 seconds. That was the whole perk. You'd also not even get much usage here, as when you spawned in, these precious seconds would be getting used up in the initial camera pan. This was truly one of the worst. Dying Light is one of the unhealthiest designs a perk has ever had. A perk that outright buffed the other side with a 50% increase to altruistic actions for the obsession, until you killed the obsession, where then you would activate the perk, slowing repair, healing, and sabotage speeds for all survivors by 25%. This not only greatly encourages tunneling, but further it doesn't even really do much once you've activated the perk. In most games in a 3v1 situation, the killer has basically won at that point. Therefore just adding an additional 25% reduction is just very unnecessary almost, and provides it at the wrong time, nearing the end of a match. An unhealthy and also just sort of bad perk. Ace in the Hole is a really interesting one. It's not good at the moment, and is seen as sort of a fun gimmick perk. However, it used to be even worse than it is now, providing a similar effect of granting an add-on when opening a chest, except it could only give you one, and there was only a 50% chance to even get one at all. So there was a 50% chance the perk just didn't do anything at all. Shadowborn in its original form was really terrible. It did actually have good effects, and so at first you might go, oh, this is fine. Well, the first 2 effects of a wider FOV, remember this is before the FOV slider came out, and then 20% extra screen brightness, seem pretty good. Good effects, especially back when the game was quite dark. The downsides, however, were getting blinded by flashlights, which were already very fast. This perk made them 50% faster, and made them take 75% longer to recover from them. Incredibly big downsides to what is realistically a small upside when placed aside these things. I would go so far to debate this perk as just a direct nerf over a benefit. Year 2 had a slight improvement over Year 1 when it came to bad perks, but it did still have its fair share. An interesting year for sure, filled with quite a few licenses. Pharmacy has got to be one of the worst perks added throughout the years, a perk that essentially has the effect of guaranteeing a green medkit when opening a chest. The main argument against this perk is that you can just bring one in. I suppose it did have additional effects too of making chest searches faster, and providing a slight reduction in the range in which chest opening can be heard, which is nice, but it's still a chest perk, which is something largely useless to begin with. Territorial Imperative has got to be one of the worst additions of this year, and one which has persisted over the years. It provided a 3-second aura reveal if a survivor entered the basement, and you were at least 32 meters away, and then it had a 40-second cooldown. Just insanely overkill in that department. 3 seconds of aura also sort of gets to me, because you could totally just straight up miss that. Like, the perk activates and you don't realize because 3 seconds of aura is insanely short. Detective's Hunch originally had a pretty bad effect, and it's because it's tied to repairing generators yourself. To get this to activate, you had to be the one to repair a generator, which of course isn't always possible. If you did, you saw all generators, chests, and totems within 64 meters, but just for 5 seconds. A tiny amount of time to actually take in all of that information. A perk that is really going to be hit and miss based on the round too, and one which even with its activation, it's likely you're unable to take in all that information it was actually providing. Knockout is a perk I want to outline as one that is just quite unhealthy, I think, sort of promoting you to slug as killer, with the perk's only value coming from this. If you downed someone, you couldn't see them on the ground as a fellow survivor, unless you were within 16 meters of them. Now, 9 times out of 10, most killers are just going to hook straight away, so this perk is already just pretty bad. In the cases when they leave them on the ground, then again, it's just promoting negative and boring gameplay, so I've never liked this perk personally, as much as I like the idea behind it. and concealing a teammate from the others. I just don't think it works in this context. Year 3 was an interesting year as it was almost entirely made up of original content. This I do think allowed a bit more freedom in the perks being made, and I do honestly think most of the original release perks were all sort of fine across the board. Predator originally had the effect of increasing the length of time scratch marks were present by 3 seconds. A decent tracking tool, to be honest. However, in this patch it was reworked to make scratch marks appear differently, closer or tighter together. The thing is, this doesn't really seem to help tracking and often makes it worse as scratch marks remain on the floor, where with the regular, messier scratch marks they'd go on the walls and objects around the floor, which can often help with tracking. And in general, Predator scratch marks are just quite a different experience over regular ones, making it just sort of bad and a needless adjustment to be made for what is largely worse tracking. So a nice idea, and one that is still a nice idea I think, but it just doesn't quite work well in execution. Maybe the scratch mark should be brighter or something instead of closer together. Buckle Up was an addition many considered quite laughable back then, a truly terrible perk. This may seem strange too because it was actually meta for quite a while, and debatably still is. Back then though, Buckle Up simply revealed the progress of survivor recovery through an aura intensity, and would reveal the killer's aura upon healing someone out of the dying state. That's all it did. It was such a niche perk, something you really didn't need in any situation, and barely got usage out of at all. It's truly shocking the subsequent rise this perk had. Beast of Prey was added this year with the Huntress, and is debatably one of the consistently worst perks the game has ever seen, and debatably the worst killer perk in the current day. This perk only activates once you have Bloodlust, the catch-up effect that activates after failing to damage for 15 seconds in a chase. This perk in its second version, changed in year 3, would make it so long as you have Bloodlust, you lose your red stain. Not even your terror radius or undetectable like you have now, but just the red stain. A truly weak effect, and one which even when active, in the few times it will be, is going to do so little to change the outcome. This has to be, I think, the most niche perk the game has seen. Windows of Opportunity finally actually used to be pretty terrible. Originally it gave the effect of revealing pallets and window vaults with an aura in the range of 20 meters, but it only did this for up to 1 vault or 1 pallet drop when in chase, and after had a 40-second cooldown. This meant you couldn't simply use the perk as you went through the chase, it'd simply be to provide information prior, making it a whole lot weaker, especially with its 40-second cooldown. You were usually not getting this back mid-chase. Year 4 was a year with a fairly strict meta, which really began to stagnate about a year later in Year 5. This year had its fair share of bad perks. Year 4 kicked off in a bit of a rough way with the nerf of Mettle of Man. Mettle of Man and its new version went from being one of the best perks in the game to one of the worst in just a single patch, just with one condition of the perk being changed too. Instead of requiring 3 hits to be taken to gain your metal hit, it was made into 3 protection hits. A rather unreasonable requirement that forced you in the way of danger, and made it so it was highly unlikely in a regular match, in a regular situation, that the perk would even activate at all. It completely gutted the perk and really turned it into sort of a meme despite being meta about 2 minutes before. Furtive Chase was very terrible, maybe one of the worst perks in DBD history. It was also very convoluted. Every time you hook the obsession, gain a token up to 4. Each token provides a 4-meter reduction to your terror radius, but only when in chase, and the perk would also switch the obsession based on who saved the last obsession from a hook. You'd also lose all the tokens if the obsession ever died. A bizarre and overcomplicated perk where even when you did reach the effect was near inconsequential. A reduced terror radius in chase did near to nothing 9 times out of 10. Cruel Limits upon release was pretty bad, where now I would say it's quite usable. Back then, instead of the effect of blocking vaults map wide when a generator was completed, it instead only did it in a 24-meter radius around the generator, and did so for just 30 seconds. In the majority of cases therefore, it would see no usage at all. 24 meters after all is pretty easy to run away from, it's really not that far. The majority of gen locations too tend to have pallets around, or just open area to reach another location. It was really great how this perk was later reworked, but this version was pretty terrible. Babysitter was another perk in the Stranger Things chapter that wasn't the best, but it was largely because of the time surrounding it and the competition it had. Babysitter back then provided an 8-second duration of no scratch marks or pools of blood to a recently saved survivor, and further revealed the person who saved to the killer, and the killer to them, with an aura for 4 seconds. It was meant to be an alternative to borrowed time, where at the time, base kit borrowed time did not exist. Therefore, the issue with this being what seemed to be an anti-tunnel and camp perk was that unhooking someone with this instead of borrowed time left them unprotected, and only masked 2 methods of tracking, and only for 8 seconds, leaving them still pretty exposed. This one is definitely as a result of the times, but it was undeniably bad. Year 5 was a pretty rough year for balancing and the meta, with the meta at the time being the incredibly annoying DS Unbreakable Dead Hard Adrenaline or something to that effect, the second chance stacking meta. During this time too though, a bunch of really terrible perks were added and altered. Hoarder actually sounded pretty cool on release and in the PTB for the twins. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The perk didn't work. I should clarify that some of the perk worked. You would get a notification for 4 seconds when a survivor interacted with a chest or dropped an item, but the supposed reduction in rarity of items found in chests did not work. So in some ways this perk does just buff the survivors by providing them with 2 extra chests. Pretty cool if you're a survivor. It's a huge shame I think too, because that reduced rarity effect is a really cool idea, and I would love to see it be implemented again. Lucky Break nowadays is seen as quite strong, but back in May 2021 it was quite terrible, after being nerfed quite substantially. Instead of providing up to 3 minutes worth of no blood and scratch marks when injured, it was reduced to just a measly 45 seconds maximum per game. This made the perk near useless, with 45 seconds providing near to no benefit, especially as you had no control over when it activated. If you got injured at all, that timer began ticking. The reason for this I think too was that at the time Iron Will still had its 100% reduction to injured noises, so there was a fear possibly around making this a far too powerful combination when Iron Will and Lucky Break were paired together. So the solution seemed to be a nerf to Lucky Break, which is unfortunately what happens in a lot of situations, despite the more problematic Iron Will lasting on. Deathbound is another one of these convoluted perks where I think the perk itself is a little confusing to read and understand, and when in-game it's very hard to track when and if the perk is working, this perk providing a very unique effect. When a survivor heals another, at least 32 meters away from you, both survivors scream, and for 60 seconds they become oblivious, but only if they move 8 meters away from one another. It's just really overcomplicated I think, and whilst the end goal of it isn't terrible, it's bad simply by this virtue of just being confusing to read and actually apply in game. For me at least, I feel I needed to read this one over a couple times before it truly sunk in. Also, it just has a direct counter within the perk. If the people stay together, the perk does nothing, so, you know, that's cool too. Self-preservation was added with All Kill and Yunjin, and is another perk that just hasn't ever been changed despite its really terrible effect. Basically, it gives you benefits when you're not the target of the killer, and your teammate is in danger. It's just really backwards in how it works. And sure, it keeps to its name and keeps to Yunjin's lore, but the effect itself is not only weak, but also incredibly niche in application. A measly 10 seconds of suppressing these tracking elements is nothing. Year 6 was a year when the meta took a bit of a step in a different direction, with one of the biggest shakeups we've ever seen. This didn't stop terrible perks from appearing though. Boon Dark Theory was added with the Sadako Rising chapter. To me too, this was sort of when boons began to fizzle out a bit, the time when it seemed that boons were probably never going to ever reach the heights that Boon's Circle of Healing did. It's understandable too. This could be a really dangerous boon if it had anything beyond its very measly 2% increase to movement speed for survivors inside of its radius. It's a tiny effect for a radius of just 24 meters. This is simply never effective or consequential unless you happen to be on an incredibly strong loop where the boon can't be broken. Again, it could be strong. We've seen what Made for this can do with a 3% increase, but this really just doesn't cut it. A small area and only 2%. A Gearhead was released with a decent effect, yet in 5.5.0 it was reworked into something truly terrible, and debatably one of the worst perks the game has ever seen. After After landing a basic attack, if someone then hit specifically a great skill check, it would reveal the generator they were on for 10 seconds. A very strange effect, very specific effect. Tying it specifically to great skill checks made it incredibly hard to use well, I think. Most skill check hits won't be greats. It feels like one of those needlessly specific perks, where when you had a game when it does activate, you would sort of question why that happened. Corrective Action has got to be one of the worst perks in the game still to this day, and it's because it fills the tiniest of niches that will probably only be relevant for maybe a couple games. This perk is probably made for teaching your friend to play the game, a perk that converts the failed skill checks of teammates into successful ones. It actually sounds fine in theory, but if you actually use it in game, you'll probably get no use out of it game after game. You'll just stack those tokens, and nothing much will happen. That's the unfortunate reality, but in fairness, I don't think this perk is made for the more experienced players. I and all of you watching this shouldn't really expect to get usage from this perk. That's okay, I do think it was made for a very specific usage, but to the wider player base, this thing is just terrible. Grim Embrace in its original format may be a bit of a hot take, but I still think the perk was pretty bad. This perk originally only blocked gens after you hooked each survivor at least one time, and did so for 40 seconds after you achieved this. The main issue with this was that it just never really worked in the way it was intended, as sort of mid-game corrupt intervention. Rarely, even when you do try, do games go in the format of individually hooking each survivor one time. There are many times you might just chase 2 people or 3 people, making the perk incredibly inconsistent and often completely useless. Having to go out of your way to always make sure you have a different person simply isn't efficient or reliable. As good as the effect has potential to be, to me this was one of the worst perks added this year, due to its inconsistency. Then again, this year had incredible perks, so that's a part of it too. Year 7 was a bit of a controversial year, containing 2 well-loved chapters along with 2 of the most divisive we've ever had. It was an interesting year for perks. Year 7 kicked off with the addition of Dredge and the pretty terrible perk of Septic Touch. Since its release, it's never been changed, and since its release, it's always been quite bad. It's also another one of the least used perks in the game currently, and it's due to its pathetic effect with its low numbers. When a survivor does a healing action in your terror radius, it applies blindness and exhausted onto them for 10 seconds, a pitifully short time, and at a time that won't even occur very frequently. It's a shame, as this maybe has potential, and I've always liked the super creepy name Septic Touch. Teamwork Collective Stealth was a perk added with Tools of Torment and was part of a new set of the Teamwork perks. This perk type, however, seems to have failed, with both Teamwork perks being left in the dust after their release. It's sort of a shame too, as this was one of the first new perk types to be introduced in quite a while. The unfortunate reason is that this one in particular is just really bad. It has awkward activation requirements, and even when used to its highest potential, does very little. I really hope for other new perk types like Invocations, there's more of an ongoing support for them. Shattered Hope is a case of a perk coming a little too late, a preventative measure for the Boon meta that came sort of after the Boon meta had ended. Its aim was to shut down strong Boon positions by providing the effect of destroying the totem the Boon is on, completely. This was completely ineffective in doing this though, with it barely ever getting usage, and seeing even to this day one of the lowest usage rates on the killer side. Some of you might not even know this perk exists. Boons were nerfed down, and using a whole perk slot just to slightly counter them a little more didn't seem worth it, then and now. Low profile release with Ada as part of Project W. This perk to me is one that fulfills such a niche role that I sort of feel like that niche doesn't need to be filled, if that makes sense. A niche so niche it just shouldn't have a perk. This perk made it so your grunts of pain, pools of blood, and scratch marks are masked for 90 seconds if either everyone is down or hooked, or you're the last survivor remaining. It's an interesting idea for a perk, but with the specificity of it, the requirement for all your teammates to be down or dead to even activate it, and finally the time limit placed onto it, are all things that make this perk so needlessly niche and quite useless by the time it takes effect. This perk just doesn't get used really. Year 8 is essentially this past year. The game at this point is the most balanced it's ever been, and perks in general mostly do something something worthwhile. There are some exceptions though. Scourge Hook Hangman's Trick is a perk that has forever had its issues since it was added with Pig back in 2018. It wasn't originally a Scourge Hook back then, because Scourge Hooks didn't even exist yet until Pinhead. It was just a regular old perk. Back then it did sort of have a use too, as it countered hooks broken by sacrifice and also sabotage in just 10 seconds by repairing them. It also later received a repair timer for bear trap sabotage, back when bear traps could be permanently broken. When it was reworked therefore in 3.6.0, it lost a lot of viability. When it was reworked again to its current state in 7.1.0, it didn't shift too much in effect. It was debatably a nerf too, where before it would reveal the auras of survivors near hooks when carrying someone, it was switched to only do this near Scourge hooks, which are just 3 out of the total hooks on the map. It did get given a slightly longer range, but really this doesn't make up for it. A pretty terrible change, I think, to a perk that was already down bad. Genetic Limits was added with Singularity and is honestly almost a disappointing perk to receive in year 8 of the game. An incredibly simple ability, and one which again just applies at such an ineffective time. When a survivor finishes a healing action, they suffer exhausted for 32 seconds. It's one of those things that just activates at the wrong time. If the survivor is healing, they're probably safe, making this perk really inconsequential. There's a reason why no one runs it, in part I think because it's also just really boring. Invocation Weaving Spiders is one of the coolest new perks we've had, but its initial version was really bad. This perk allows you to perform a special action in the basement, and in return remove 10% off of each generator's total charges. The issue was originally that this process took 120 seconds, or 2 minutes. If the killer found you during this time too, the entire progress could be reset in seconds. So at the best, you spent 2 minutes, or maybe slightly less if you had a teammate, removing some charges, which is a debatable exchange of time. Or at worst, you wasted multiple minutes on end. Even if you succeed, you get broken, so it's still a bit of a coin toss. Just a far too long activation requirement. In most games, the killer would find you, and even if they didn't, the time taken to do this would often throw the game for other survivors. I'm going to make an exception for this year and do 3 killer perks because I think there were a lot more killer perk nerfs or weak releases this year. Specifically in this case because of the FOV rework becoming base kit, it completely ruined Shadowborn for the second time. Removing its special and unique effect prior, I was really hoping it would get something unique or worthwhile, but it simply got the addition of 10% haste when blinded. It just feels really lackluster and like a very generic effect thrown in. The same goes for Monitor and Abuse, which just had the FOV effect removed and replaced with nothing, which I thought was a little sad. Alright, well that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed, and be sure to drop any other perks you remember being terrible throughout the years down below. Thanks, and goodbye.